there has never been a case of a serious discussion between Americans and Saudis on how to move the security relationship forward and how to take it beyond this oil for security covenant, right? Which was always transactional in the sense that you give us the free access to cheap oil, we'll protect you from external dangers, right? Because internal was always a little bit complicated. We weren't exactly sure how to do that, but externally, it was straightforward that should there be any kind of an external threat to the kingdom, we will be there to intervene and provide them with security. Well, that formula in many ways has expired, and it has expired a while ago. And if any circumstance or event proves that more clearly, it's the 2019 attacks, right, against Saudi Aramco by the Iranians directly, not even by proxies or allies of them in the region, directly, straight from Iran. And so that reinforced the point that, whatever we had with the Saudis in terms of a security arrangement needed to be considerably revisited so that it actually works for both sides and that it actually provides them with the security that they need.
This is the 966.
We are pleased to be speaking with Bilal Saab, a political military analyst on the Middle East and U.S. policy toward the region. He is a senior fellow and director of the Defense and Security Program at the Middle East Institute, adjunct professor at Georgetown University, author of the book published in 2022 entitled Rebuilding Arab Defense, U.S. Security Cooperation in the Middle East, and recently a new paper for the Middle East Institute entitled After Oil for Security, a blueprint for resetting U.S.-Saudi security relations, which we will focus our discussion on this week. Also served as a senior advisor for security cooperation at the U.S. Department of Defense. Of course, he also bears the honorable, unremovable mark of being a previous guest of the 966. Bilal, welcome back. Thank you for joining us, and nice to see you.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you guys for inviting me again. I'm actually surprised you invited me again. I thought I blew it up last time.
No, actually, I was just looking at last time, and this is why we love having you on the show. You had just written. This was about a year ago. Actually, a year ago, March, for your debut on the 966. And you had just written a really good piece called A Gradual Reset with Saudi Arabia. And
yes,
we had talked about, at some point, obviously, we wanted you back on the show. And now, essentially, a year later, you've just written just a terrific analysis, After Oil for Security, a blueprint for resetting U.S. Saudi security relations. Lucian referenced it. And this is why we love having you, Bilal, because this is timely, important, and really informative analysis on the relationship. Other people aren't really, it's not out there. And that's why, thank you for coming back. We're really excited.
No, it's a pleasure. Richard, before you say anything, I want to tell the audience that you did me such a nice favor at Heathrow Airport. The lady did not like the size of my toothpaste, so she confiscated it per rules, I guess. And you were kind enough to buy me another toothpaste so I can take with me on the plane. Thank God I was in business class, so I didn't cause any crisis with whoever was sitting next to me, a bad breath crisis. But I do remember that kind of gestures, and it will not go unnoticed. So thank you very much, Richard.
Well, I wish I could take more credit for it. It was at a Boots in the just at the airport, and they had a 4 for $3 deal. And I said, I don't need 4. I'll give one to Bilal. I really wish I could take more credit than that. But it got me a good deal, Bilal, so I had to share.
So I was headed to Al Ula, and you were going to Riyadh, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And we talked about it. I got to Al Ula a week after you did.
Yes, correct.
I'm so upset that there was not a video or a photo of the handoff of the toothpaste. I would put it on a t-shirt and send it to both of you guys. The story is amazing. I'm so glad you said that.
That was a strategic event. I should have taken pictures. But I did take pictures of Al Ula. I mean, I put them on LinkedIn. Are we allowed to say that in here? LinkedIn? I'm not promoting anybody. I'm
Absolutely.
not getting any money from LinkedIn. But anyway, what a terrific, unique, beautiful spot. I had a great time. I wish I had more time to spend there, but I definitely will go back.
So let's talk about this. We talked about it when we were talking beforehand, Bilal. this article, this analysis, it's not an article, it's a significant piece that Bilal wrote, a blueprint for resetting U.S. Saudi security relations. Essentially, just to open it up, you say, although U.S. Saudi bilateral ties are on the mend, ambiguities in the transactional nature of the 1945 Oil for Security Covenant contribute to mistrust and mutual tensions. But the burden of fixing or stabilizing the relationship is a shared responsibility. One more. While there is a consensus among U.S. and Saudi officials and observers on the need to further upgrade the two countries' defense relations, there is no serious discussion of how this could be achieved on a more strategic level. It's time for Washington and Riyadh to reconfigure their security ties in accordance with new U.S. geopolitical priorities and the new Saudi defense requirements.
Isn't that amazing, Richard? How old is this relationship? And yet, you would think that we've had many opportunities, not one, many opportunities to discuss how we could upgrade security and defense ties with the Saudis. And yet, truly, honestly, and it's not like I'm, basing this on my own, analysis or viewpoints. You can imagine I've talked to a lot of people and researched a lot while writing this analysis, and there has never been a case of a serious discussion between Americans and Saudis on how to move the security relationship forward and how to take it beyond this oil for security covenant, right? Which was always transactional in the sense that you give us the free access to cheap oil, we'll protect you from external dangers, right? Because internal was always a little bit complicated. We weren't exactly sure how to do that, but externally it was straightforward that should there be any kind of an external threat to the kingdom, we will be there to intervene and provide them with security. Well, that formula in many ways has expired, and it has expired a while ago. And if any circumstance or event proves that more clearly, it's the 2019 attacks, right, against Saudi Aramco by the Iranians directly, not even by proxies or allies of them in the region, directly, straight from Iran. And so that reinforced the point that, whatever we had with the Saudis in terms of a security arrangement needed to be considerably revisited so that it actually works for both sides and that it actually provides them with the security that they need. I very much emphasize the word shared responsibility because there's no way this is going to work if we were to take the lead and if we were to take action without the help of the Saudis. They have to be invested simply because it is their own security. They have responsibilities just like we have responsibilities. And that kind of conversation, that kind of arrangement, we've never had with the Saudis. It was almost always, as I mentioned in the analysis, one-sided. We come up with a statement like the Carter Doctrine, for example, right? 1980s, early 1980s. Matter of fact, 1980, with the State of the Union address of former President Jimmy Carter. He's saying, if we perceive that there will be significant threats to our own interests in the Persian Gulf, we would intervene militarily to protect those interests. And at the time, you remember, it was the Soviet Union a year before, having invaded Afghanistan. We were worried about them going south to the oil-rich fields of the Persian Gulf. And so that was sort of like a communication to the Soviets more than anybody else. It wasn't really about the Iranians, although 1979 happened, obviously, with the Iranian Revolution, Islamic Revolution. But this was a message for the Soviets, first and foremost. In that message, there was no discussion whatsoever with the Saudis what the parameters of intervention were. When would we do that? When would we not do that? What is it really about Saudi security that we understand that goes beyond like a massive full-fledged invasion, right? Because there's a whole plethora of other contingencies and circumstances that would threaten Saudi security, to which we didn't really have an answer for the Saudis, right? So we owe it to obviously ourselves first and to the Saudis to have a conversation that is a lot more complex than what Jimmy Carter said many, many years ago, which again is unilateral, one-sided, has very little to do with Saudi security per se, and more about the U.S. interests. What we perceive to be an attack or a threat against U.S. interests is what matters the most. It is less about Saudi per se. Well, the Saudis finally realized that, well, this is not sufficient. We need to have a conversation about this. And obviously, 2019, once again, and several other instances before that, I get into those in the analysis, right? When there was a bombing in the mid 90s of the Khobar Towers, right? The Iranians blew up the Khobar Towers, killed a lot of Americans. And we did nothing in response to that. Of course, it was also an attack against Saudi national security. It happened on their own soil, but we did nothing at the time. The Clinton administration decided that the risks of escalation were too high. And so they may have responded through covert means or sanctions or what have you, but there was no military intervention at the time. Same with the 2019 unprecedented attack by the Iranians. Okay, and so logically, the Saudis came up with the conclusion that we need to have a conversation. Okay, whatever worked in the past worked in large part because we were lucky that there was no significant attack like the one that happened in 2019. Right, the proposition of us coming to the rescue was never really tested. And then finally it was in 2019, and we didn't. Now, I do write about it somewhere else where the Saudis were very clear to us that please do not respond without without consulting with us and without making it clear to us that we're not going to be caught in the crossfire. We're not going to be caught in a shooting war between you and the Iranians where we feel very vulnerable. But beyond that kind of communication that we got from the Saudis at the time, we were really not that predisposed to actually responding to what the Iranians were doing, right? And so that obviously caused a huge crisis of trust. The conversation about American protectorship, guardianship, whatever you want to call it, Richard, became extremely relevant for the Saudis. And here we are now having the same exact conversation about what is really the future of our security partnership with the Saudis. Can we even call it a partnership? I mean, it's a relationship, obviously. It's an old relationship. We've never had to have those conversations because the Saudis were never attacked this way. And now they are, obviously, because of Yemen, because of the relationship with the Iranians. Now we could talk about later, what they are doing now with the Iranians with the diplomatic accord that they came up with Chinese assistance. But put that aside for a moment. As far as we're concerned, we owe it to ourselves and to the Saudis to have an honest, transparent, realistic conversation about what would it really entail? What would it require for us to provide them with security without having to upgrade this thing into a full-fledged alliance? Because, oh, by the way, that's not going to happen. For political and strategic reasons, we're not going to do that. But there is so much room, so much space for upgrading the relationship in a way that doesn't have to escalate to a defense pact. So I think I've said too much, Richard. You can take me in any other direction you want.
Well, no, I think that's a good context. And I would add, in terms of the Carter Doctrine, we did have, an enormous success at the time when we interceded after Iraq invaded Kuwait. And that, of
Correct.
course, the motivation there is it was in our interest. And so it happened to be also in the Saudi Arabia's interest. So there was a nice coming together of mutual interest.
Correct.
I think the afterglow of that kept us going for a long time.
Yes.
A lot of goodwill that came out of that. But let's return to your piece. And I like that you set out the scenario where the sort of overarching Carter Doctrine is insufficient. I think you go on to look at a couple other things that are critical to going forward and where in your analysis we're falling short. Both parties are falling short.
Yeah.
First is the sort of the philosophical, and I'm going to take one of you. You lay out 5 points at the beginning. I'm going to take 3.
Sure.
Since Desert Storm, that what we were just talking about, Washington and Riyadh have sought to improve Saudi armament while paying scant attention to Saudi defense management,
right,
which is critical to manage, employ, and sustain those Saudi weapons. So I want to put that in. So we've got in your analysis, we're missing that phase 0, and I want you to elaborate on what the phase 0 is.
Yes.
And then this is combined as you go on and you draw out and you make it very clear. The United States has and this is point 5 that Bilal adds. Again, I want you to get to this piece. It's very good. Point 5, the United States has handicapped diplomatic presence in the kingdom, and its enormous security cooperation posture has never been properly organized and integrated.
Right.
emphasize that last part.
Right.
Never been properly organized and integrated. So let's take these each of a piece, all right?
Yes. Yes.
The philosophical,
Uh-huh.
and essentially, what we're doing with them to service what we perceive as defense needs. You're essentially saying this is misguided.
So philosophically, what's changed, Richard, is that we want to now help them get into a position where they can actually defend themselves, right? That doesn't mean that we're going to abandon them, that we're going to be doing things that we've never done before with the Saudis. Again, that is breaking news. I mean, this is shocking that for such a long relationship, how many years? 75 plus?
Yeah.
We've never done that with the Saudis. Isn't that remarkable? It's shocking.
Well,
Now,
every time you write a piece, Bilal, because we've been involved. I'm always stunned and amazed because for vast swaths of Saudis and Americans, this is their full time job.
yes,
So
yes.
I'm always amazed that but also when you break it out, and I think it's worthwhile breaking out in the institutional obstacles to it and other things that have been in the way. You can sort of see why it's happening, but it emphasizes why what you're saying is so important now. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. So to get to that point where they are in a position to contribute more meaningfully to collective security interests, to defend themselves, there's responsibilities on their end and responsibilities on our end. We've never looked at those seriously, ever, until very recently, which is really why it's an embryonic process right now, which is why you're not really seeing a whole lot of fruits yet. But at least the mindset has changed finally. And so it's going to take a while before you really start seeing some return on investment. On the Saudi side, you got to get a lot more serious about not just the weapons that you're buying, but also how you effectively employ and sustain, right? So this is where you talk about phase zero. Phase zero is when you and Lucian basically prepare for this interview so effectively that it becomes almost effortless, that the actual interview itself runs so smoothly. It's the same thing in military. In the military, if you're not prepared for war, you're not going to do very well on the battlefield. It's just 101, right? And so for the Saudis, phase zero, or what you call steady state operations, everything that you're doing to ready yourself to prepare for war through management, through defense spending that is appropriate, to accounting, to human resource management, all those things that you and I talked about on the first episode, right? All of those things you got to get a lot more serious about. And they are, okay? This is where the Saudis, since at least 2017, 2018, started their own Goldwater Nichols process, which is something that we did many, many years ago, right? So 1986. This is their restructuring effort that looks at all those unsexy, boring, but incredibly critical things about the defense sector, right? So by all means, keep buying weapons. I'm not saying don't, but just integrate those into something of a more solid defense foundation that allows you to use those weapons and sustain them over the long run. And we can do that for you. We can advise you in all those things because we've done it before. We have that relationship with you. We know your strengths, we know your weaknesses, but you have to do that yourself. So generate combat power and then effectively use it and employ it and sustain it. Okay? On our end, how the hell are we going to provide that kind of advisory service if on the ground we're not postured to do that? What does that mean? It's just fancy words for all of our presence in the kingdom has been geared towards much more tactical things that have very little to do with what the Saudis really need, which is this whole defense managerial process, right? So we have many outfits in the kingdom. We've had them for many, many years. Heck, all the way back to the 1950s. And I'm not going to get into acronyms and names here because they don't matter. But the point being is that there are multiple outfits that we have in the kingdom. None of this infrastructure that we have in the kingdom is integrated. They don't talk to each other. Kind of like pre 9/11, our intelligence community. They don't talk to each other, right? And so now what we need is to better organize ourselves and integrate all of these disparate parts that we have in the kingdom so that we are in a position to provide uniform, unified advice to the Saudis to help them go through this defense transformation process. Right now, with okay, I lied. I'm going to mention a couple of acronyms. USMINIM, you've had people from USMINIM on your show, right? Brad Gandy before
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one outfit, pretty big. Army. Then you've got the one with the Ministry of Interior. Then you got another one with the SANG, the Saudi National Guard. All of those pieces, they don't talk to each other. They have different responsibilities. They have no clue what each is doing. And you're supposed to have an integrator. Okay. Again, I'm not going to use military terms. I have them in the piece. An integrator, a communicator, a coordinator to organize all this stuff and provide the right kind of advice to the Saudis. We don't have that. We tried to do that back in the day. I hate to say it, but we've had military personnel at the very high level in CENTCOM who are not happy with the reorganization for different reasons. Okay. But now you're getting Saudi demand to actually reorganize our own posture because, by the way, we can't do that without the permission of the Saudis. Why? Because we signed so many agreements with the Saudis and we would have to go back to them, consult with them if we were to reorganize it. That's why you sign contracts, right?
So I want to jump in here, Bilal, because I think although I know you want to don't get lost in the weeds, but it speaks, and I thought this was very instructive. I did not know this, and it speaks to your point that this discussion hasn't been had up until very recently, and there's been no movement in this. And let's talk that U.S. U.S. military training mission.
Yes.
$100 billion plus operation in terms of things they oversee. OPM SANG, Saudi Arabian National Guard, and you also mentioned there's USA MAG, which is sort of their counterintelligence, what we do. But just USAMID established in the 50s, OPM SANG established in the 70s. USA MAG in the early aughts. It was fascinating to me to learn that because of these are all underwritten and paid for by the Saudis, they do not come under U.S. Central Command purview. As opposed to other, and you can take it from me if you want, as opposed to almost everybody else in terms of our relationship. So this is a unique situation. Is that correct to say?
Yes. And I was shocked to learn that myself. I didn't know that. Going into this research, I didn't know that.
I didn't know it until I read your piece.
How could the Saudis be paying through, again, it's a complicated process that has to do with like administrative fees coming from FMS cases, FMS being foreign military sales cases. Those admin fees are the ones that are actually paying for a lot of this presence that we have in the kingdom. So you can imagine why the Saudis finally realized that, wait a minute, we're not only paying for your presence, but we're not getting the right kind of advice and the right kind of services. This is messed up. Okay. So now, technically speaking, it is true that they're paying for a good bit of that presence. But if you were to get me a CENTCOM commander who would instruct his folks on the ground to better organize, to better integrate and all that, I think he or she one day hopefully can do it. I mean, this rule or implicit rule should not really stand in the way of a major reorganization effort, right? Now, you still have to consult with the Saudis, fine. But guess what? As I told you before, the Saudis are now on board with this reorganization of our own presence. Mm-hmm. They came to us, I have it in the piece, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, where in this strategic joint planning committee that we have with them, they came to us and said, look, this disparate infrastructure that you have, it's not doing us any good. And yes, we are to be blamed for it because back in the day, each of these ministries, they were kind of like their own fiefdoms run by different princes.
Correct.
There's a new sheriff in town. He wants to consolidate. Okay. So if you want to hear it from us, here it is. Here's our blessing. Here's our directive. Please go ahead and make it consistent with what we're trying to do. Okay. You have our green light. They communicated that to us very clearly, whether it was last year or 2 years ago, I can't remember. Okay. What have we done since? Nothing. Nothing. Why? Because the political relationship is so toxic and nobody at the leadership level is really instructing anybody to follow through on what the Saudis told us.
So you've got this structural block. Mm-hmm. You know, and it goes to reason that, you know, USAMID that's been around since the 50s, or OPM SANG since the 70s, they have established significant bureaucratic ties, significant political relationships.
Correct.
And it also goes to reason that these established organizations are going to be resistant to change.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is classic bureaucratic politics stuff.
Yeah. And just as opposed to Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, which are under CENTCOM command, which anybody operating in those countries would have to be responsive to a CENTCOM directive. It's
Correct.
an entirely different thing. All right. So
Right.
you have structural obstacles
Hmm.
within it. You also talk about the need for an SCO.
Yeah.
And can you elaborate on that?
An SEO is a security cooperation office. Essentially, it is another one of those elements that would serve the role of organizing all of this assistance that we provide to the kingdom, coordinating it, integrating it under a single command. So we did that with so many other places, and it worked out beautifully, right? Whether it's Jordan, whether it's in Bahrain, whether it's in Kuwait, we have that. Except in the kingdom, where it's supposed to be even more obvious that we should have it because it's a bigger country and
Mhm.
it's a
Yeah.
closer partner. And oh, by the way, $100 billion FMS active cases with the kingdom.
Right.
How the hell do we not have that in the kingdom? So again, some blame should be assigned to the Saudis for many years in the past because that's exactly how they wanted it. They wanted it to be
Correct.
divided because the way that they were running their defense system. It was very much divided amongst princes and so on and so forth. And so we were very sensitive to that. We did not really obviously want to force the issue and tell them, look, the way you want to run things is not really the ideal way. But hey, I mean, they were paying for it and we can't force it. Okay. Now they're telling us different, that we are ready to reorganize this thing. Please come back to us and tell us how you're going to help reorganize your own presence. We have done nothing so far. So this is
So,
where the Security Cooperation Office is so critical because
yeah.
it is one of those elements of integration that we need to organize this entire presence in the kingdom that we have and finally understand who the hell's doing what. You've got all these pieces and you don't know who's doing what. It's remarkable. What is your job at U.S Minim? What is your job at OPM Sang? What is your job at MOI MAG? And who's overseeing whom, by the way? Tell me about the chain of command. Those things that I sought to research and try to find answers for in this piece, which thank God I got a lot of traction in DoD, by the way. But it doesn't matter if it got traction if nothing's being done about it. Apparently, and I mentioned it every time this conversation is had, it never goes beyond above the SES 2 level, which means that it's never high level enough to get to the SecDef, to get to the interagency, to get to the National Security Council, you name it. It always at a lower level. Everybody understands those problems, by the way. No one's oblivious to them. They've been going on for a long time. The issue is about leadership, which which I try to avoid in the piece because the moment you say there's no leadership to do anything, then what's the point? But my mission, my purpose in this piece is to at least lay out, as the title suggests, a blueprint. So whenever you guys are ready to actually execute, let me offer you my blueprint. This is the executional challenge that we have, but let me at least define it to you. Let me describe it. Let me give you some recommendations so that one day when there is leadership, when there is a will on both sides to make this happen, here's the blueprint. Nobody had done that before. Nobody had done that before.
Right, and it's in the piece. So I mean, definitely, it's a, I don't know if it's appendix or if it's actually incorporated in it.
Oh, I give
Um,
credit to my colleagues here at MEI. They did a fantastic job with this nice infographic.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm MEI, by the way, is I think is doing good work. You got a lot of good, got a lot of bright minds over there.
Thank you. I'm
So
biased, obviously.
props
So
to them.
if I could just ask a question. So in this new SCO, like imagine if they actually do it.
Yeah.
U.S Minim, OPM SAG, USA MAG, do they go away? Do they get folded in
No,
and go
everybody
underneath?
now. Well, no, I mean they would sort of have different sets of responsibilities that are a little bit more like what you would do with training groups that would work on particular weapons, for example, like a THAAD battery, like a Patriot battery, or how to field this kind of equipment or that kind of equipment. Purely tactical things, right? The SCO would be the sort of the integrator, the one that is looking at this really from a strategic point of view about how we're actually delivering assistance to the Saudis. So no, there's no real need to discontinue those. I mean, you can keep them if you want. I'm pretty sure it's more difficult, frankly, to remove them than actually keeping them, but just change the responsibilities. Certainly do not keep the format that we have right now where basically people are running their own show and nobody's talking to each other.
You know, one of the things that I've heard frustration on the Saudi side is exactly that. What you there's not enough senior people are actually tasked with this. That it doesn't rise to the appropriate levels to actually create change, push change. Is that accurate?
That's legitimate to a point. I'll tell you why it's legitimate and why it's legitimate to a point. It's legitimate because with that kind of massive muscle movement and reorganization, I'm sorry, you need a 4 star. Okay. Nobody's going to really be able to do this massive reorganization without having political weight, without having enough stars on their shoulder, because they're going to be issuing all sorts of orders and nobody listens to people if they're not influential. Okay. So you need leadership. I get that part. But do not overemphasize this because the real experts do not necessarily have to be 4 star generals. The real experts of defense management are simply defense management specialists. Those are the folks that you actually need on the ground in Saudi Arabia to help the Saudis undergo this defense transformation process. So fine. Get me a 4 star general, get me an admiral who could oversee this so that the Saudis know that we're actually invested and we're sending the right kind of message. But the folks doing the real hard work, they're not the generals.
Well, let me ask you a question.
They're not the colonels either.
Right. And that's so often the case, where the real knowledge and expertise is pushed down. But let me ask you this. I mean, there is significant defense expertise and specialists in Saudi Arabia, in the private sector.
In the private sector.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Is there any way? I mean,
well, how comfortable are you with that? I mean, you just said it yourself. How comfortable are you that the guys who really know are in the private sector? I'm not against the private sector. I'm a capitalist more than anybody you can think of. Okay. But I am much more in favor of the United States government driving this process in partnership with the private sector, in collaboration with the private sector, not the other way around. I want to be driving the car.
No, I agree 100%. Okay? What I'm saying is the talent is there.
Yes.
And if you were being honest, the depth and breadth of experience is greater in the private sector than in the public sector.
That's why people leave government, because the pay is much better.
Exactly. A real challenge. Challenge. So all right. So we're facing, and I don't want you to come across as too bleak on this, because I don't think you are.
No, because I'm not.
Before, just for our listeners,
I'm just wearing a black shirt. That's all.
But I want our listeners to hear your last sentence in this piece. The United States is in a seminal period in the relationship with Saudi Arabia, but Washington is half stepping with respect to its response.
Yes.
What you're saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that we are inching our way, getting our way to the right solution. We're just not moving quickly or aggressively or decisively enough.
You said it correctly. Exactly right. I don't think we're appreciating the gravity and the urgency of this challenge.
Right.
And so, yes, we finally have a better diagnosis, but now it comes down to speed, quickness of execution, and actually devoting the right kind of resources for its problem set.
So I want to take you to the next step. You've outlined, I think, really nicely, and that's why, again, for the third time, fourth time, fifth time, I don't know, read the piece. It's a good piece. But so you're talking about the philosophical structural challenges that we have in this immediate situation, and you've laid out a path for it, and hopefully this will contribute to the energy going to try and seek some change in this situation. Why, for our U.S. national security interest, why would a more capable, better prepared Saudi Arabia be good for us?
Well, I wish we had started with that, because that's what's most important, right? I mean, why the hell are we bothering talking about this and investing so much effort, blood, and treasure if we don't have a crystal clear understanding of why this ultimately benefits us, right? So here's my answer. We are now at a period where obviously we're competing with China, right? And we are focusing much of our attention and resources on the Indo-Pacific and, of course, European theater, given what's going on in Ukraine, which means that we are reducing our posture in the Middle East. Matter of fact, we have said it. We have telegraphed it to the entire world that we are de-emphasizing the region. Therefore, we need simple physics. We need our partners to step up. If we're going to draw down, somebody else is going to have to step up. Otherwise, vacuums are created. And typically, those vacuums are filled by adversaries. We don't want that. Okay? So, for the Saudis to step up, this is where our conversation becomes pertinent. They have to do X, Y, and Z. We have to do X, Y, and Z. So having a more capable Saudi that can defend itself means that we contribute far less to that mission. And we can actually trust the Saudis to perform those tasks. In the past, it was all us. It was the guardianship model. Thank God we got lucky because they weren't really attacked, except for obviously Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait and threatening the kingdom. But then after that, it was relative peace, right? And so a more capable Saudi that can contribute to collective security interests, that at least has the willingness to do that. Okay, that's very important. It's not just capability, but willingness. You got to incentivize them to do that, obviously. And a Saudi that is in your corner in this strategic competition with China is very important. I mean, look at how we've responded this time, a little bit more muted, fine. But last time, how we responded when the Saudis decided to cut oil production. You don't think this country is going to have an increasingly important role on the world stage on the global energy markets? Wouldn't you want an influential power like that to be on your side? Yes. So that's why this matters. That's why we can we need capable partners. It's that simple. And Saudi's too big for us to ignore. We can afford not having the same kind of relationship with the smaller countries in the region, but not Saudi. Not Saudi. They're way too influential.
You mentioned, and one of the things you mentioned in your piece is the sort of vacuum that's been created by lack of ambassador on seat in Saudi Arabia, and we've talked about this.
Finally, Michael Ratney is headed there. Thank God. I met with Michael before he went there. I actually showed him this. He read it himself. I don't know if he wants people to know that, but I mean, it's no secret. It's a public document. But I had a good conversation. Share with him whatever I know about our posture there, and so hopefully there'll be an increased effort to try to get to those things that we need to do. But thank God now we have an ambassador. Yes. For how long did we didn't have one?
5 out of 7 in the last 7 years. 5 out of the last. Well, let me rephrase that. Only 2 of the last 7 years have we had an ambassador on seat.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine how communication could be screwed up when you don't have your main representative in the partner nation sitting in an embassy and communicating with the relevant stakeholders.
No matter how capable the DCM is, and I think we have a capable one, but it's not the ambassador.
No, it's different. You know that, right?
Exactly, 100%.
And you were talking about like, the Saudis want high-level military personnel to oversee this. It's the same thing politically. I mean, if you don't have an ambassador, that in itself is a message.
100%. And it's been a frustration. But so this is a fascinating conversation. I think this has captured a lot. I mean, what we wanted to do was to understand your points in this piece and then to tie it together with why it matters, which you've done beautifully. I don't have anything to add. Lucian?
Can you tell us about policy sessions, your work as a DJ, and the drops you're doing?
Why don't we start with this?
Well, you also have a podcast. You have a podcast too.
No, it's a one-on-one conversation. Actually, it's very similar to what you guys are doing. It's a one-on-one conversation called the Defense Leadership Series. Well, I mean, as the name suggests, people from the defense community, former, current, one-on-one 60-minute conversation about defense policy in the Middle East. And we've done 19 episodes so far. The next episode I'm going to do with my latest recruit, the former MARCENT commander, which is the Marine Corps component of CENTCOM.
It is, yeah.
Sam Mundy. So I'm really very much looking forward to that. But more importantly, good God, policy sessions. That's right. I've been a DJ since 1997, Richard, Lucian, and as you can imagine, when you get married, you can't be the same nocturnal animal DJing in clubs around the world. But now I have this, I don't know what to call it, the show, sets that I do on SoundCloud that obviously are all house trance music. And so I have a number of followers, people who really follow me and wait for these sets. But it's my passion, obviously. It's my hobby. It's more than a hobby. And even though I can't play in clubs anymore, but, I'm a bed DJ now, bedroom DJ.
All right. For our listeners, that's on SoundCloud. It's called Policy Sessions.
Yes.
And if you're, go ahead, Richard. Sorry.
No, just and Lucian, you probably and your one-on-one discussion is called what's
It's
the
called
title?
Defense Leadership Series.
Defense Leadership Series, and that's available on all podcasts where platforms.
It's on YouTube. It's broadcast live on YouTube, but
All
also
right.
all of the sessions are on our website.
Yeah, if we could just make a recommendation, go onto LinkedIn and follow Bilal Saab, because you're going to get a good mixture. Like I was reading before our conversation, Bilal, piece you shared on Ukraine. We don't really need to get into that now because we had such a good discussion, but just fascinating stuff. He curates really good stuff, Bilal does. So follow Bilal on LinkedIn.
Just recently released something on Ukraine, and I felt it was imperative for me to share it, not only because he's a teammate, obviously, but because I thought the piece was really good. So yeah, I mean, every time there's good analysis, I don't care who wrote it, I'll definitely put it on LinkedIn.
Great. And we're going to put a link to your recent piece, After Oil for Security, on our YouTube channel and on the podcast page as well. So if you're listening to this or watching this, you can just go to that and click on it. It's really so good. Definitely worth your time to read it. So Bilal Saab, political military analyst on the Middle East and U.S. policy towards the region. Thank you for joining us. Stay out of trouble in those BA lounges when you see Richard.
Yeah. Make sure to get the miniature toothpaste so that people don't confiscate it.
Or alternatively, Bilal, whenever you go to a cool place, take me with you and I'll bring toothpaste.
You got it. That's it. That's the priority.
Thanks, Bilal. This is great.
Thank you very, very much.